Welcome to the Ingrid Centurion podcast. I am retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, Iraq War veteran, Black Hawk pilot, and founder of Generations for America, Ingrid Centurion. In this podcast, we discuss America's constitutional battles and undertake in engaging and comprehensive interviews with legal experts, whistleblowers, and insiders. We uncover the stories that others won't touch, from government overreach to erosion of liberties. Each episode dives into today's most pressing issues and empower listeners with knowledge to protect their rights. No fluff, no spin, just raw conversations for serious times. And welcome to the Ingrid Centurion podcast. Thank you, Frank, for being on the show again. Today, I want to talk about Joe Biden's prostate cancer diagnosis, because it's a serious situation and it brings lots of questions to all our minds as far as his medical health, which we all talked about, right? While he was in there, what state was he in? And now we're hearing this devastation and severe prognosis. Frank, what are you thinking about all this?
Well, it is quite a shock that this family doctor announced this just last week. But this actually raises more questions than it answers. It's almost inconceivable that this is just, especially in its advanced stage, this is something that Joe Biden just occurred. This has been going on for a long time.
Well, I thought that the president received the best medical care in the country. I mean, the president, commander-in-chief of the United States of America, the most powerful nation on this planet, I would think that he gets the best medical care ever.
To me, it's I would agree. That's what makes it so puzzling. The idea of conducting the basic exams, a PSA exam and a digital rectal exam, which, by the way, I had just done last Wednesday myself after 3 years.
Tell us
that the idea of these tests should have been given to him because of his position at least every 6 months. So either they failed to do these tests for the last 2 or 3 years or more.
No, we can't err on that side, because
that would be malpractice. That would actually be malpractice.
That's right.
If they did the test and they did the test and they detected problematic or a cancerous enlargement or this irregularity or nodules or whatever, they did all that and then didn't tell him, which would be equally horrible. Or they did tell him and his family, and he and his family decided to keep it to themselves, so as not to interfere with their political plans.
Right. But okay, I do agree sometimes with medical privacy, right? You have your medical condition. No one should have access to your background when it comes to medical. But in this situation where you know that the Democrat Party, Biden was their only candidate, right? They got behind Biden and he was the candidate. He ran his campaign from the basement. And I just think at such an older age that he is, more than likely they knew this information. They just chose not to share it.
Yeah. They chose not to share it. I believe that's the case. And I think because had they shared the knowledge that he had had prostate cancer and needed to go undergo treatment, which is a very unpleasant treatment. It could just involve administration of hormones, but also radiation and chemotherapy. that they decided that they did not want to keep that. They didn't want the public to know that. Now, there is a responsibility, I think, when the president is suffering from a debilitating medical condition, that the public has the right to know this. Now, no longer is this true because he's a private citizen, and his doctor can't be compelled to speak because his doctor is this is a privacy between him and his doctor. But this whole situation is symptomatic of something much graver, and that is there was a systematic effort to keep Joe Biden's medical and mental condition under the rug, to deceive the American people with the quite willing help of the corporate media, for the most part, to deceive them, because the party bosses believed in 2020, early 2020, that Joe Biden was the only one who could beat Donald Trump, not Bernie Sanders. So they did all they could to undermine Bernie Sanders' campaign, even so far as some leading Democratic strategists like Carville calling Bernie Sanders a communist, which shocked me because that was so Nixonian, 1950s Nixonian. I was shocked when I heard that. But they did everything they could to keep Bernie Sanders out and to boost Joe Biden because they believed he was the only candidate who could win. And he barely won by 45,000 votes under very questionable circumstances.
And the thing with all this politics is that I'm realizing it's more about selection. The group of people who are the experts in this, obviously, they decide on a selection of individuals, and they kind of like place their bets on the horses and say, okay, I think this one will really win, and this is what we need to do. And they go through their strategization of how they're going to accomplish that win. And in this situation, we know how old he was, and I mean, he looked fragile. If we knew about this, he wouldn't even stand a chance.
No. And the very notion that he was actually prepared until the disastrous performance in the debate, he was actually prepared to run again, that the party bosses had him in line to run again. Even in this debilitated state, they thought it could pull it off a second time. They may have, who knows, but they thought they could do it again. And then the debate came along in late June, and that pretty much ended that. But although it took 3 or 4 weeks for it to sink in.
And it's just unbelievable to me how the people who were also running, I remember Nikki Haley talking about how Trump was so old and he needed to have some type of mental test done on him. And as they're saying all these things, here we have a sitting president who obviously was in decline, and the media and the party, the Democrat Party specifically, just trying to show he is fit. We saw him stumble on many times going up the aircraft. We saw him fall on his bicycle. I mean, we saw him not be able to even express words. It was such an embarrassment for our country.
Well, where Nikki Haley was wrong, it's just not a matter of age. I look at Bernie Sanders, for example, who is a few years older than Joe Biden, and the man is sharp as a tack. So whereas age may be an indicator, it is not dispositive. So Joe Biden had demonstrated a lot of characteristics of a man who was incapacitated, mentally incapacitated, and now we know physically incapacitated. His gait, the way he walked, the way he shuffled. I mean, I'm no medical doctor, but I've heard medical doctors who are learned and observant say, these characteristics, if I had them in a patient, I would find very troubling. The prostate announcement, therefore, comes as not a shock, because it is, people get prostate. Elderly men get prostate. It doesn't come as a shock. But what was shocking was how advanced the prostate cancer was. How advanced the prostate cancer was. That's the problem.
Well, the other thing I find interesting is that the world saw this. We all saw it, and so medical doctors probably feared to come forward and make their prognosis of our sitting president. You know, everything that's happening today is it's just all about you cannot speak your mind. You cannot express the truth because if you do, you know, you may lose your job. You may be ridiculed. And I just find, like Trump says all the time, the media, the fake news. We have to be able to see through the half truths. That's what makes our world right now so challenging and complicated. There's so much misinformation, so much wrong information out there. People are bombarded. You can go to a website that's completely false. It's a total scam. But the individual reading it might think, "Oh, this is the truth." They went and Wikipedia'd it and they looked it up. They think this is the truth, and it's not the truth.
Yeah. There is a systematic but informal suppression of points of view that do not fit in with the party line. Now, in the Soviet Union, this was done quite routinely. People knew that the organs of information were by and large purveyors of the party line, and they disregarded Izvestia and Pravda. But in the United States, ABC, owned by Disney, CBS, CNN, even Fox to a certain extent, they have points of view that that deliberately suppress or denigrate or discredit points of view that are disfavored. They're not part of the party line. They're not part of the. And it happens with COVID. It happened with the origin of the virus. It happened with the efficacy of the vaccine. It happens with Ukraine, where only one side of the story gets told. So there is an informal kind. Sometimes it is aided and abetted by the government, as we know. In the Biden administration, they deliberately sent government high-ranking officials to social media to repress points of view they consider to be disinformation. That's not their job, or misinformation, when in fact the government is itself the greatest purveyor of disinformation and misinformation. And I'll use weapons of mass destruction as a prime example. And what the government wants is they want to keep the monopoly on disinformation. They don't want to share it with anyone else. The fact of the matter is that even disinformed or misinformed speech is protected speech. And the government cannot suppress it, directly or indirectly. So one of the things that they suppressed was the Joe Biden condition, mental condition, until it became impossible to suppress anymore. Now they're all running for the exits to say, "Oh, I knew, but we did a bad job in revealing it. We did a bad job in informing the public." They're all trying to find their excuses.
Yeah, it's just a terrible thing that's happening today. But thank you so much. I wanted to talk a little bit about this. This is the Ingrid Centurion podcast. We focus on the U.S. Constitution and with great emphasis on that First Amendment. And this is what we're going to talk about every show. We want to share individuals' opinions of situations, and we want the truth, right? Right, Frank? We want the truth.
Well, let me just say one more thing in parting. First of all, I pray for Joe Biden.
Yes.
And pray that he doesn't suffer, because this can be quite painful when it metastasizes to the bone. And the treatments are quite painful. I had a very close friend of mine, very, very dear friend of mine, who I worked with at the National Park Service for decades. He succumbed to this disease, and his last few years were a living hell.
Aww.
So I pray for Joe Biden. We all pray for him that he doesn't suffer. Yeah, that he doesn't suffer. But this doesn't mean he's a decent person. No, he is not a decent person. He's never has been a decent person. He's a dishonest, corrupt, unprincipled politician and always has been. But that doesn't mean that God cannot forgive him and that we cannot pray for him.
You know, you're so right on that, because I remember the day that he won, and the next day he implemented all these executive orders to open our borders. And having
Open
worked
the border.
That's right. And when he did that, I posted on my social media, I said, he is a national security risk to this country. And I was 100% right on that. And it's just, and I remember, I never went around saying how much I hated him or anything like that. All I wanted people to know is that his actions were putting us at risk. And he did put us at risk. And what I would say is, we have to pray for him. We have to pray for him. And that's what we did for 4 years. And thank God President Trump won. And he is doing truly an amazing job. And the disinformation continues.
Well, the Biden's policies, which do not ever fit, they don't fit into his longstanding political principles. The Democratic Party, even under Bill Clinton and Obama, was a virulent deporter of illegal aliens.
That's
over
right.
2 million.
We used to call him the chief deporter. I was working the border. That's right. He was the chief deporter in chief when I worked on the border.
What happened here was that Joe Biden was never really present. It was the people that surrounded him, the people that had been put in let's call them the puppet masters. They were the ones who adopted these most radical and extreme policies. Mayorkas is a good example. A true believer that anyone who presents themselves at the border must be allowed entry, because that's the American way. And it will make our country stronger if we allowed 10, 12, 15 million people into the country annually, if you could get away with it, if we could process that many. So these were not really Biden's policies. He just wanted to be in the White House, which he rarely spent time. And 40% of the time he was at his beach house in Delaware or his other home in Delaware. So being in the White House, the prestige of the president, Air Force One, the helicopter, all of that stuff, those were the things that Joe Biden has lusted after his entire political career, since he was a young man in his late 20s, early 30s. But the price that he paid, or that we paid, was that the most radical elements in our body politic seized the opportunity to implement their agenda. And their agenda, in the end, was harmful to America, and it was rejected by the American people resoundingly in the 2024 election.
That is so correct and right on, and why we meet every week to talk about these type of things. So thank you, Frank, once again for being on the show. We're going to get this out there, and it's going to sound wonderful. And next week, we'll talk about something even better.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ingrid.
Have a great week.
Take care. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the Ingrid Centurion podcast. Be sure to join me every week as we bring you inspiring guests, facts, and hard-earned lessons. Find us on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or in your favorite podcast app. If you would like to be a guest, get involved, or find out about sponsorship opportunities, reach out to us at ingridcenturion.com or generationsforamerica.com. Thank you, and we'll see you next week, so tune in for more conversations.